she secretly fed the wounded wolf every night, never knowing he was the alpha king in disguise. Why did she secretly feed the wounded wolf every night? And why did she never know he was the alpha king in disguise? Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. If you enjoy emotional werewolf stories filled with mystery, destiny, and unforgettable moments, you are in the right place. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another story like this. Thank you so much for your continued support and for being part of our amazing community. Now, tell us in the comments, would you help a wounded stranger without knowing who they truly were? With that thought in mind, let us step quietly into a moonlit forest where one simple act of kindness is about to change everything. I learned a long time ago that kindness does not ask who deserves it before offering a helping hand. The first snow of the season had not yet arrived, but the mountain air already carried the sharp chill of approaching winter as moonlight filtered through towering pine trees surrounding the quiet village of Willow Creek. Every evening, after finishing another long day gathering herbs, chopping firewood, and helping elderly neighbors with simple chores they could no longer manage alone, Abigail Carter followed the same narrow forest trail that wound beside a gentle stream reflecting the silver glow of the full moon. At 23 years old, she had grown accustomed to living a quiet life. As a gentle omega with no influential family and little more than a modest cottage inherited from her late grandmother, she had learned that peace often came from expecting very little and appreciating whatever goodness each day quietly offered. She never complained about her simple routine because the forest had become a faithful companion that never judged her by status or strength. Every evening the wind whispered through cedar branches above her, owls called softly from distant trees, and tiny woodland creatures darted across fallen leaves as though welcoming her familiar footsteps home. That particular night, however, something felt different. The forest seemed unusually still, as if every sound had paused to listen for something hidden among the shadows. Abigail slowed her pace, tightening her warm wool cloak against the cool breeze. Then she heard it. A faint, strained whimper drifted from somewhere beyond a cluster of ancient oak trees near the stream. It was so quiet that another traveler might have mistaken it for the wind moving through dry branches, yet Abigail immediately recognized the unmistakable sound of an animal in distress. Without hesitation, she stepped carefully off the narrow path, using her small lantern to guide the way between moss-covered stones and low-hanging branches. The soft glow revealed patches of flattened grass leading toward the roots of an enormous cedar that had stood in the forest longer than anyone in the village could remember. There, curled tightly beneath the shelter of its massive trunk, lay a magnificent white wolf. Even beneath the dim lantern light, its thick fur shimmered almost silver against the dark earth. Its powerful frame suggested remarkable strength, yet exhaustion had stolen every trace of confidence from its posture. One front leg rested awkwardly beneath its body, and its breathing came in slow, uneven rhythms that hinted at days without proper rest. Abigail instinctively stopped several feet away, allowing the frightened animal space instead of rushing forward. The wolf slowly lifted its head. Brilliant blue eyes met hers across the quiet clearing. They were unlike any eyes she had ever seen. Intelligent. Calm. Almost impossibly aware. For several silent heartbeats neither moved. The forest seemed to disappear until only the moonlight, the cool night air, and the space between them remained. Abigail expected the wolf to growl or retreat deeper into the shadows. It did neither. Instead, it simply watched her with quiet caution, as though measuring whether the stranger standing before it carried danger or mercy. Abigail slowly knelt, placing her lantern upon a flat stone before reaching into the cloth satchel hanging across her shoulder. She removed half of the warm bread she had baked that morning along with a small flask of fresh water collected from the mountain spring. Carefully, she placed both upon the ground several feet in front of the wolf before quietly stepping backward again. "You do not have to trust me," she whispered with a gentle smile. "You only have to eat." The wolf remained motionless until Abigail had retreated far enough to lean quietly against another tree. Only then did it slowly crawl forward, never taking its eyes off her, before lowering its head toward the bread. Relief softened Abigail's expression as the animal accepted the simple meal. She stayed there in complete silence, watching the wolf finish every bite before drinking from the shallow wooden bowl she had filled with water. When the last crumb disappeared, the wolf slowly looked up once more. For just a single moment, its steady blue eyes seemed to carry something strangely human, almost like gratitude hidden beneath layers of quiet pride. Then, without warning, a distant wolf howl echoed somewhere beyond the northern ridge. The wounded wolf immediately turned its head toward the sound, its ears standing alert as though someone unseen had just called its name. The forest remembered every promise made beneath the moon, even when the people making them never spoke a single word. Abigail remained beside the old cedar until the distant howl faded into silence, watching the magnificent white wolf lift its head toward the northern mountains before slowly relaxing once more. Whatever had called to it remained unanswered. The animal lowered itself carefully against the tree roots again, its injured front leg trembling ever so slightly as exhaustion reclaimed the strength it had briefly gathered. Abigail quietly exhaled with relief. She had worried the wolf might disappear into the darkness before finishing its meal, but instead it stayed exactly where it was, as though the ancient cedar had become the only place where it felt safe enough to rest. "I should let you sleep," she whispered gently, picking up the empty wooden bowl and slipping it back into her satchel. Before leaving, she reached into another small pouch and carefully removed several dried sprigs of mountain yarrow and lavender she had collected that morning. They were simple herbs her grandmother had always used to soothe tired muscles and encourage healing. Abigail placed the herbs upon a flat stone near the wolf without attempting to move any closer. "Maybe they will help," she said softly, smiling to herself. "Or maybe they will simply smell a little nicer than wet leaves." The corners of the wolf's alert ears twitched almost imperceptibly, as though it had understood the kindness hidden inside the ordinary words. Abigail offered one last gentle glance before turning back toward the winding trail leading home. Behind her, the wolf watched until the warm glow of her lantern disappeared between the trees. The following day unfolded much like every other autumn afternoon in Willow Creek. Abigail gathered fresh herbs from the hillside, helped old Mrs. Martha Green stack firewood before the colder weather arrived, and repaired a torn quilt for a young family living near the edge of the village. Yet throughout the day, her thoughts quietly drifted back toward the lonely white wolf resting beneath the cedar. She wondered whether it had found more food after she left. She wondered if the injured leg had become worse overnight. Most of all, she wondered why such a powerful creature had been completely alone in the forest. As sunset painted the sky with soft shades of amber and crimson, Abigail finished baking another loaf of fresh bread inside her small stone cottage. She added slices of roasted chicken left from supper, a small flask of clean spring water, and a bundle of fresh herbs wrapped carefully inside linen before setting out once again along the familiar forest trail. The moon rose earlier that evening, bathing every pine needle in pale silver light. When she reached the old cedar, her footsteps slowed instinctively. The wolf was already there. It had not wandered away. Instead, it lay quietly beneath the same enormous tree, lifting its head the moment her lantern appeared through the darkness. Something had changed. Although caution still lingered inside those remarkable blue eyes, fear had softened into quiet curiosity. Abigail smiled warmly. "I thought you might still be hungry." Just as before, she placed the food several feet away before stepping back without asking anything in return. This time the wolf did not wait nearly as long. It rose carefully, favoring its injured leg, and approached the simple meal while keeping one steady eye upon the gentle Omega standing beneath the moonlight. Abigail noticed the wound looked cleaner than before, as though the wolf had somehow managed to wash it in the nearby stream despite the pain. Encouraged, she slowly pointed toward the fresh herbs resting beside the bread. "Those might help too," she said quietly. The wolf lowered its nose toward the herbs, breathing in their familiar scent before unexpectedly nudging the small bundle closer with one careful paw. Abigail laughed softly, surprised by the strangely thoughtful gesture. "You really are listening, are not you?" For just an instant, something almost resembling amusement flickered across the wolf's intelligent eyes before it calmly finished the meal. High above the forest canopy, hidden among distant shadows, another pair of wolves silently watched the quiet clearing before disappearing deeper into the mountains without making a sound, leaving the wounded white wolf to continue guarding a secret that neither Abigail nor the peaceful forest was yet meant to understand. Trust is never built through words alone. It grows quietly in the space where fear slowly learns to rest. 3 evenings passed before Abigail realized she had unconsciously begun measuring her days by the moment she could return to the old cedar tree. Every morning she completed her ordinary chores with the same gentle dedication that had always defined her life. She gathered wild herbs before sunrise, delivered fresh eggs to Mrs. Martha Green, repaired worn blankets for elderly neighbors, and spent quiet afternoons tending the small vegetable garden behind her cottage. Yet as the western sky slowly transformed into shades of amber and violet, she always found herself preparing an extra portion of supper before placing it carefully inside her familiar satchel. Fresh bread, roasted chicken, clean spring water, and healing herbs had quietly become part of her evening routine. She never questioned why. She simply hoped the lonely white wolf would still be waiting beneath the ancient cedar. On the 4th evening, as moonlight shimmered across the winding stream, Abigail stepped into the familiar clearing and immediately noticed something different. The wolf was no longer lying beneath the tree. For one brief moment, disappointment tightened quietly inside her chest. Then a soft rustling came from behind the cedar. The magnificent white wolf emerged slowly from the shadows, walking with noticeably greater strength than before. Although it still favored the injured front leg, the painful limp had softened into only a slight hesitation with each careful step. Abigail smiled with genuine relief. "You look stronger tonight." The wolf stopped several feet away, watching her with those remarkable blue eyes that seemed far older and wiser than any ordinary animal should possess. Instead of immediately placing the food upon the ground as she always had, Abigail carefully removed the wrapped bundle of herbs from her satchel. "I found fresh comfrey today," she explained quietly. "My grandmother always said it helped tired muscles heal more comfortably." She gently unwrapped the herbs before placing them beside the meal. The wolf lowered its nose toward the leaves, breathing deeply before lifting its eyes toward her once again. This time, instead of waiting for Abigail to retreat completely, it calmly approached while she remained standing nearby. The distance between them had grown smaller without either of them noticing exactly when it happened. Abigail remained perfectly still, allowing the animal to decide how much trust it wished to offer. The wolf finished eating before unexpectedly lowering itself onto the soft grass only a few feet away rather than returning immediately beneath the cedar. The quiet gesture surprised her. She slowly sat upon a nearby fallen log, careful not to move too suddenly. For several peaceful minutes, neither one disturbed the silence surrounding them. The forest seemed alive with gentle sounds. A nearby stream murmured softly over smooth stones, pine branches whispered together beneath the cool breeze, and somewhere above them an owl called. Into the moonlit sky. Abigail found herself speaking as though the wolf had become an old friend who preferred listening to talking. She told it about Mrs. Martha's stubborn determination to chop her own firewood despite turning 70 years old. She laughed softly while describing the village children chasing squirrels through fallen leaves that afternoon. She even admitted how lonely the cottage sometimes felt after sunset, though she quickly smiled at herself afterward. "Listen to me," she whispered with quiet embarrassment. "I suppose you are not interested in hearing about my ordinary little life." The wolf never looked away. Its steady gaze remained fixed upon her face with remarkable patience, almost as though every simple story mattered. After a long comfortable silence, Abigail carefully reached into her satchel one final time and removed a thick wool blanket she had brought from home. Without moving any closer, she folded it neatly upon the grass near the cedar. "The nights are getting colder," she said gently. "You can use it if you want. If not, that is perfectly fine too." She quietly gathered her empty bowl and lantern before beginning the walk home. Halfway down the forest trail, curiosity finally persuaded her to glance back one last time. Beneath the silver moonlight, the wounded white wolf had slowly settled onto the folded blanket, its brilliant blue eyes following her until the trees gently hid them both from one another once again. Some legends survived for generations because they carried just enough truth to make ordinary people wonder if the impossible had once walked beside them. The following afternoon, Abigail carried a basket of freshly gathered herbs across the village square toward Mrs. Martha Green's weathered cottage. Smoke drifted peacefully from stone chimneys while children laughed together beneath towering maple trees whose brilliant autumn leaves floated gently through the cool afternoon breeze. It looked like another ordinary day, yet the conversation waiting for her would quietly linger long after sunset. Martha welcomed Abigail with her usual warm smile before pouring 2 cups of fragrant chamomile tea. The elderly woman had lived in Willow Creek longer than anyone else, and although many villagers considered her old stories little more than harmless folklore, Abigail always listened with genuine respect. As they sorted bundles of lavender and rosemary across the kitchen table, Martha glanced thoughtfully toward the forest visible beyond the cottage window. "Have you noticed the woods becoming quieter these past few nights?" she asked. Abigail nodded carefully. "A little. The birds seem to settle earlier than usual." Martha smiled knowingly. "My grandmother used to say that happened whenever the moon guardians returned." Abigail looked up with quiet curiosity. "Moon guardians?" The old woman leaned comfortably against her chair, her silver hair glowing softly beneath the afternoon sunlight. "Long before our village existed, people believed the Alpha King sometimes traveled beyond the palace without guards or royal banners. They said he could take the form of a great white wolf whenever he wished to learn how ordinary people truly lived." Abigail laughed gently, shaking her head with affectionate disbelief. "That sounds like one of your favorite bedtime stories." Martha chuckled. "Perhaps it is. But every old story begins somewhere." She reached toward an old wooden shelf and carefully removed a faded painting no larger than a family photograph. It showed a magnificent white wolf standing beneath an ancient cedar while a full moon illuminated the surrounding forest. Around the wolf's neck rested a small silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon. Abigail admired the painting for a moment before quietly returning it. "It is beautiful." Martha lowered her voice almost to a whisper. "The legend also says the Alpha King only revealed himself to someone who offered kindness without expecting reward, because true character can never be measured while people know they are being watched." Abigail smiled politely, unwilling to dismiss the old woman's story yet equally unwilling to believe such extraordinary tales. "If I ever meet a magical wolf," she joked softly, "I will remember to be polite." Martha laughed warmly. That is all any grandmother could ask. As evening approached, Abigail prepared another simple meal before beginning the familiar walk toward the ancient cedar. The forest welcomed her with the comforting scent of pine, damp earth, and cool mountain air. When she reached the clearing, the white wolf was already waiting, resting quietly upon the wool blanket she had left several nights earlier. Seeing it there somehow made the lonely clearing feel strangely like meeting an old friend. Abigail knelt beside the familiar flat stone and unpacked fresh bread, roasted turkey, clean spring water, and another bundle of healing herbs. "Mrs. Martha told me the strangest story today," she said with a quiet smile while arranging the food. "According to her, the Alpha King sometimes becomes a white wolf." The wolf slowly lifted its head, those remarkable blue eyes resting steadily upon her face. Abigail laughed softly at herself. "Can you imagine?" she continued. "If that were true, then I suppose I should bow every evening before dinner." To her complete surprise, the white wolf lowered its head ever so slightly, almost resembling the smallest respectful nod before calmly beginning its meal. Abigail blinked once before smiling to herself. "You really do have wonderful manners." Hidden beyond the moonlit trees, 2 silent royal scouts watched the gentle exchange from a respectful distance. One looked toward the other with quiet astonishment before whispering only 4 careful words. "His Majesty found her first." The forest protected those who respected its silence, and sometimes it answered kindness with quiet acts of its own. The morning after Mrs. Martha shared the old legend, Abigail found herself smiling whenever she remembered the white wolf lowering its head almost as though it had understood every word she said. She gently laughed at the memory while gathering fresh herbs beneath the golden light of another crisp autumn morning. Surely it had only been coincidence. Animals often surprised people with unexpected behavior. There was no reason to imagine anything more. By late afternoon she finished helping a neighboring family preserve vegetables for the coming winter before returning to her small cottage. As always, she prepared 2 simple meals instead of one. Fresh bread had become a familiar tradition, but this evening she also wrapped slices of roasted venison, a handful of dried berries, and a small piece of sharp white cheese inside clean linen. Looking at the neatly packed bundle resting on her kitchen table, she smiled quietly to herself. "You really have become spoiled," she whispered, imagining the white wolf waiting patiently beneath the old cedar. As twilight settled across Willow Creek, Abigail followed the familiar trail through the forest, her lantern casting warm circles of light across the winding path. The air smelled of pine needles, damp earth, and distant rain carried by a cool mountain breeze. Somewhere high above, stars slowly appeared between dark branches as the full moon climbed higher into the clear night sky. When she reached the clearing, the white wolf was already there. This time it did not remain beneath the cedar. Instead, it stood quietly near the edge of the stream, gazing toward the flowing water as though listening to something only it could hear. At the sound of Abigail's footsteps, it calmly turned toward her. The injury that had once forced every movement now appeared noticeably improved. Although it still favored the front leg slightly, strength had returned to its proud posture, and its thick white coat shone brilliantly beneath the moonlight. Abigail placed the familiar meal upon the flat stone before smiling with genuine relief. "You are healing much faster now." The wolf approached without hesitation. It no longer waited for her to step back. Instead, it calmly accepted the food while she remained only a few feet away. The quiet trust between them had grown so naturally that neither seemed aware of how extraordinary it had become. Abigail carefully refilled the wooden bowl with fresh spring water before noticing a loose strip of cloth wrapped gently around the wolf's injured leg. She frowned slightly in surprise. She had never tied such a bandage herself. "Someone else has been taking care of you too," she murmured softly. The wolf briefly looked toward the dark northern ridge before lowering its eyes again. Abigail smiled. "I am glad you are not completely alone." After finishing the meal, the wolf unexpectedly walked several steps away before stopping and looking back toward her. It waited. Abigail hesitated before following at a respectful distance. The white wolf led her only a short way through the trees before stopping beside a narrow section of the trail where an enormous pine branch had fallen earlier that day after strong winds. The heavy trunk completely blocked the path she normally used to return home. Looking beyond it, Abigail noticed fresh claw marks across the bark where the wolf had apparently tried to clear part of the way. She quietly understood. Had she taken her usual route in complete darkness, she might not have seen the fallen tree until she was standing directly beneath its unstable branches. She gently rested one hand against the rough bark before turning toward the white wolf with grateful eyes. "You brought me here on purpose." The wolf simply stood watching her, calm and silent beneath the silver moon. Abigail's heart warmed with quiet gratitude. She had spent every evening believing she was protecting a wounded animal. Yet without asking for recognition, the wounded animal had just protected her in return. Hidden among distant pines, the 2 royal scouts exchanged another astonished glance before one quietly whispered, "His Majesty has not allowed anyone this close since the day he became Alpha King." Far beyond the quiet forest, a kingdom had already begun searching for the king who disappeared every night beneath the same moon that watched over Abigail's gentle kindness. While Willow Creek settled peacefully into another cool autumn evening, Ashen Crown Palace stood wrapped in growing uncertainty. Towering stone walls reflected silver moonlight across polished courtyards where royal guards quietly exchanged concerned glances instead of their usual confident greetings. Inside the council chamber, maps of the northern territories covered an enormous oak table as advisors gathered around flickering lanterns whose warm light failed to soften the tension filling the room. Elias Mercer, captain of the Royal Guard, stood beside the western window wearing a dark ceremonial uniform embroidered with the silver crest of the Alpha King. His calm expression rarely betrayed emotion, yet tonight even he struggled to hide his concern. For nearly 2 weeks, King Rowan Blackwood had vanished from the palace every night shortly after sunset, returning only moments before dawn. No royal escort accompanied him. No servant knew where he traveled. Every attempt to follow him had quietly failed because the king always disappeared somewhere deep within the northern forest before anyone could remain close without being discovered. "We cannot continue pretending nothing is happening," one elderly council member finally said, folding his hands across the table. "If neighboring packs learn the Alpha King leaves the palace alone every night, rumors will spread before winter arrives." Elias listened respectfully before answering with measured confidence. "His Majesty has always protected this kingdom wisely. Until he chooses to explain his reasons, my duty is to protect both his safety and his trust." Although his words sounded steady, he privately carried questions no loyal captain could easily ignore. Earlier that afternoon, 2 trusted scouts had quietly returned from another unsuccessful attempt to observe the king's nightly journey. Instead of reporting danger, however, they described something neither had expected to witness. They spoke of a peaceful forest clearing beneath an ancient cedar. They spoke of a gentle young omega carrying fresh bread, herbs, and clean water each evening without realizing who waited there. Most surprising of all, they described the Alpha King in his white wolf form accepting every simple gift with quiet gratitude instead of the proud distance he normally kept from everyone outside the palace. Elias had listened to every detail in thoughtful silence before dismissing the scouts with strict instructions never to speak of what they had seen. Now, standing alone upon the palace balcony after the council meeting ended, he found himself looking toward the dark forest stretching across the northern horizon. He had served Rowan Blackwood faithfully for 12 years. He had witnessed battles won through courage, difficult treaties secured through wisdom, and countless moments where the Alpha King placed the kingdom above his own comfort. Yet never before had Elias seen his king willingly lower every defense around another living soul. Meanwhile, beneath the familiar cedar deep inside the forest, Rowan remained quietly awake after Abigail returned home for the evening. The meal she had prepared rested finished beside the empty wooden bowl, while the wool blanket she had brought days earlier still carried the faint comforting scent of lavender from her cottage. Slowly, the great white wolf lifted his head toward the moonlit sky. His brilliant blue eyes reflected thoughts far more complicated than any ordinary animal could possess. For many nights he had told himself he would stop returning to the clearing once his injured leg healed completely. Each morning he repeated the same promise. Each evening he found himself waiting beneath the ancient cedar long before Abigail's lantern appeared through the trees. The wound that had first brought him there had nearly disappeared. What remained was something no healer's herbs could easily explain. Somewhere between shared silence, simple meals, and gentle conversations offered without expectation, the Alpha King had begun looking forward to the quiet company of someone who had never once bowed before him, never sought his favor, and never cared about the power hidden beneath his white fur. High above the clearing, the full moon shone silently through the towering pines while Rowan realized with growing certainty that his greatest secret was no longer his hidden identity. It was how difficult the thought of leaving that peaceful clearing had quietly become. Sometimes the hardest promise to keep is the one you make only to yourself. As another peaceful day faded into evening, Abigail found herself hurrying through her chores with unusual anticipation. She had gathered fresh mushrooms after sunrise, delivered healing herbs to Mrs. Martha Green before lunch, and spent the afternoon mending winter coats for several village children. Yet no matter what occupied her hands, her thoughts quietly wandered back to the ancient cedar, hidden deep within the forest. She smiled at herself more than once, amused that a creature she had once approached with careful caution had somehow become the part of each day she looked forward to most. Before leaving her cottage, she baked a fresh loaf of rosemary bread, wrapped slices of smoked turkey inside clean linen, added a handful of crisp apples from the orchard behind her home, and filled a new wooden flask with warm broth instead of cold water. The evening air had become noticeably colder, and she imagined the warmth might be comforting after another long night beneath the open sky. When she reached the familiar clearing, the white wolf was already waiting beside the stream instead of beneath the cedar. Moonlight shimmered across its thick white coat, making it appear almost luminous against the dark forest floor. Abigail immediately noticed another change. The limp that had once slowed every step had nearly disappeared. The powerful animal now stood with quiet confidence, its broad shoulders straight and its steady blue eyes brighter than ever. Relief filled her heart. "I think you are almost completely healed," she said gently as she unpacked the evening meal. The wolf approached with calm familiarity, no longer hesitating before accepting food from the stone where she always placed it. After finishing the warm broth, it surprised Abigail once again. Instead of returning to its usual resting place, the wolf slowly walked toward her until only a single step separated them. Abigail remained perfectly still, allowing the choice to remain entirely its own. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Slowly, almost cautiously, the great white wolf lowered its head. The soft edge of its thick fur brushed lightly against the sleeve of her wool cloak. Abigail's eyes widened with quiet wonder. A smile spread across her face so naturally that she barely noticed it herself. Very carefully, she lifted one trembling hand. "May I?" she whispered. The wolf did not move away. With extraordinary gentleness, Abigail rested her fingertips against the thick fur along its neck. It felt warmer than she expected, impossibly soft beneath the cool night air. She stroked its coat only once before letting her hand rest quietly at her side again, unwilling to demand more trust than had already been freely given. The wolf closed its eyes for the briefest moment, as though accepting the simple kindness with complete peace. Far beyond the clearing, hidden among the shadows of towering pines, Elias Mercer stood silently beside the two royal scouts who had guided him there earlier that evening. They remained far enough away that neither Abigail nor the Alpha King could sense their presence. Elias watched the quiet exchange without speaking. After several long moments, one young scout whispered almost inaudibly, "Should we ask His Majesty to return before the council grows more concerned?" Elias slowly shook his head. His usually disciplined expression softened as he watched the gentle Omega smiling at the great white wolf with no fear, no ambition, and no expectation of reward. "No," he answered quietly. "For the first time in many years, His Majesty is not carrying the weight of a crown. Tonight he is simply being allowed to exist as himself." Back in the clearing, Rowan silently struggled with a decision that grew more difficult each passing evening. His strength had returned. His injury had almost completely healed. By every reasonable measure, there was no longer any need for him to continue appearing beneath the ancient cedar. Yet when Abigail smiled and quietly wished him a peaceful night before preparing to leave, every instinct inside him resisted walking away forever. As she disappeared along the moonlit trail, Rowan remained standing beside the cedar, watching the fading glow of her lantern until it vanished beyond the trees. For the first time since arriving in the forest disguised as a wounded wolf, the Alpha King realized that recovering his health had become far easier than preparing himself to lose the quiet companionship he had never expected to find. The smallest discoveries often arrived disguised as ordinary moments, quietly waiting for someone curious enough to notice them. The next evening, Abigail followed the familiar forest trail carrying another warm meal, a fresh bundle of herbs, and a quiet sense of happiness. She no longer tried to explain. The white wolf had become part of the rhythm of her life as naturally as the sunrise over Willow Creek or the sound of the stream flowing beneath the old cedar. She no longer wondered whether it would be there. Somehow, she simply knew. The forest greeted her with its usual calm embrace. Pine branches swayed gently beneath a cool breeze, crickets sang softly among the fallen leaves, and moonlight painted silver ribbons across the winding stream. Yet as Abigail stepped into the clearing, she immediately realized something had changed. The white wolf was nowhere in sight. She slowed her footsteps, her eyes searching every familiar corner beneath the towering cedar. "Are you here?" she asked quietly, smiling at herself for speaking aloud. Only the gentle murmur of flowing water answered. Abigail placed the basket upon the flat stone anyway, arranging the bread, roasted chicken, warm broth, and herbs exactly as she always had. "Perhaps you found somewhere warmer to sleep," she whispered. "Or maybe you finally decided you no longer need someone bringing you dinner every night." Although she tried to sound cheerful, a faint sadness quietly settled inside her heart. She sat upon the fallen log where she often spent peaceful evenings talking to a companion who never interrupted her stories. Minutes passed. The moon climbed higher. Still, the clearing remained empty. Abigail finally stood, deciding she should leave the meal behind in case the wolf returned later. As she lifted the empty basket, something metallic caught the corner of her eye. A faint silver reflection shimmered beneath a patch of ivy growing beside the cedar roots. Curious, she knelt carefully and brushed away several damp leaves. Hidden beneath them rested an elegant silver medallion attached to a broken leather cord. It was beautifully crafted, displaying the image of a crescent moon surrounded by finely engraved wolves standing beneath towering mountains. Around its outer edge were tiny symbols unlike anything Abigail had ever seen in the village. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. Even in the soft moonlight, the silver gleamed with remarkable brilliance despite lying unnoticed upon the forest floor. Abigail gently turned the medallion over in her hands. The reverse side carried another engraving, this one even more intricate than the first. At its center rested the royal crest of ashen crown, surrounded by words written in the ancient language taught only inside the royal archives and palace schools. Abigail recognized the crest immediately. Every citizen of the kingdom knew the symbol belonging to the Alpha King's household. She frowned thoughtfully. How did something like this end up all the way out here? The leather cord had clearly snapped, as though whoever wore it had lost it accidentally while moving quickly through the forest. Abigail looked around the clearing once more. The white wolf remained nowhere to be seen. Carefully, she wrapped the medallion inside a clean handkerchief before placing it safely inside her satchel. If it belongs to someone from the palace, she murmured softly, I should return it. Before leaving, she glanced one final time toward the ancient cedar where the folded wool blanket still rested neatly beneath its enormous branches. It looked strangely empty without the white wolf quietly watching her from beneath the moonlight. I hope you are all right, she whispered into the cool night air. Then she turned toward the winding trail leading home, unaware that high upon the rocky ridge overlooking the clearing, a tall figure dressed in a dark traveling cloak silently watched her disappear through the forest. Hidden beneath the shadow of towering pines, Rowan stood in his human form for the first time since their unexpected friendship had begun. His injury had fully healed, yet his hand instinctively reached toward the place around his neck where the broken leather cord had once held the royal medallion that now rested inside Abigail's satchel. A quiet smile touched his face despite the growing certainty that fate had just taken the first irreversible step toward revealing the secret he could no longer hide forever. The quietest nights often became the ones that changed everything, because silence left room for the heart to notice what words never could. Abigail hardly slept after finding the royal medallion beneath the ancient cedar. Long after returning to her cottage, she carefully cleaned the silver crest with a soft linen cloth before placing it beside the lantern on her bedside table. Every time the candlelight touched its polished surface, the engraved crescent moon seemed almost alive. She knew the emblem belonged to Ashen Crown Palace, yet she could not understand how such an important object had found its way into a forgotten corner of the northern forest. More than once she considered taking it directly to the nearest royal outpost the following morning, but another thought quietly held her back. What if whoever lost it returned to search for it first? Perhaps waiting one more night would be the kinder choice. The next day passed more slowly than usual. Abigail gathered herbs, helped Mrs. Martha repair a broken fence, and delivered fresh soup to an elderly widower recovering from illness, yet every ordinary task seemed accompanied by the same quiet question. Would the white wolf return tonight? As the sun disappeared behind distant mountains, she prepared another simple meal exactly as she had every evening before. Fresh bread, warm broth, roasted turkey, and a small apple pie she had baked that afternoon rested neatly inside her familiar basket. Before leaving, she gently slipped the wrapped silver medallion into her satchel. If you come back, she whispered softly to herself, perhaps this belongs to whoever has been looking after you. The forest welcomed her once again with cool autumn air and the comforting scent of cedar carried upon the evening breeze. Moonlight shimmered across the winding stream exactly as it always had. Yet the moment Abigail stepped into the clearing, her hopeful smile quietly faded. The ancient cedar stood alone. The folded blanket remained untouched beneath its broad branches. The flat stone where she always placed dinner reflected only pale silver light. There was no white wolf waiting beside the stream. No familiar blue eyes watching her approach through the trees. She slowly unpacked the meal anyway, arranging everything carefully upon the stone as though routine itself might somehow guide the missing companion back to her. Minutes stretched quietly into nearly an hour. Abigail remained seated upon the fallen log, listening to the whispering pines and the gentle murmur of flowing water. Several times she glanced hopefully toward every narrow trail leading into the clearing, expecting to see the graceful white figure emerge from the darkness. It never did. At last she stood, wrapping her cloak more tightly against the growing cold. "I suppose this means you are finally well enough to continue your journey," she said softly, offering the empty clearing a gentle smile despite the unexpected ache inside her chest. "That is a good thing. It really is." Even as she spoke those words, they felt strangely difficult to believe. She placed the wrapped royal medallion beside the untouched meal, hoping its owner might discover it before morning. Then, after one final lingering glance toward the silent cedar, she turned toward the path leading home. Hidden high above the clearing, Rowan watched from the shelter of a rocky overlook dressed once again in his dark traveling cloak. Elias Mercer stood several steps behind him in respectful silence. The captain had finally persuaded his king that remaining hidden any longer would only deepen the deception surrounding the gentle Omega who had cared for him without asking a single question. Rowan's eyes never left Abigail as she slowly disappeared through the moonlit forest carrying an emptiness she did not fully understand. "She believes I have left forever," he said quietly. Elias nodded. "Tomorrow the palace hosts the Harvest Council. Every village will send representatives." Rowan's expression softened with quiet certainty. "Then tomorrow she will finally receive the answer she deserves." Beneath the ancient cedar, the untouched meal remained waiting beside the silver medallion while the full moon watched silently overhead, as though even the forest understood that the next sunrise would bring the end of one secret and the beginning of a destiny neither Abigail nor the Alpha King could avoid any longer. Some meetings feel strangely familiar long before the heart understands why. Morning sunlight poured across the towering stone walls of Ashen Crown Palace as representatives from villages throughout the Northern Territories arrived for the annual Harvest Council. Horse-drawn wagons lined the grand courtyard while merchants, farmers, healers, and community elders carried carefully prepared reports through enormous carved oak doors leading into the royal hall. Willow Creek had attended the gathering every autumn for generations, and this year Mrs. Martha insisted that Abigail accompany her for the first time. "You have done more for our village than anyone your age," the elderly woman said warmly as they approached the palace gates. "Besides, these old knees appreciate younger company on long journeys." Abigail smiled softly while adjusting the satchel hanging over her shoulder. Hidden safely inside rested the carefully wrapped silver medallion she had found beneath the ancient cedar. She hoped someone within the palace might recognize its rightful owner. As she crossed the magnificent entrance hall, Abigail could not help pausing in quiet wonder. Sunlight streamed through enormous stained glass windows, painting colorful reflections across polished marble floors. Ancient banners displaying the silver wolf crest hung proudly from towering columns, while royal guards stood silently beside every doorway dressed in dark uniforms trimmed with elegant silver embroidery. Everything felt grand beyond anything she had ever imagined, yet strangely peaceful rather than intimidating. Elias Mercer noticed the young Omega almost immediately. Standing beside the entrance to the council chamber, he quietly recognized the same gentle face described so many times by his trusted scouts. Without revealing any emotion, he approached with respectful courtesy. "Welcome to Ashen Crown Palace," he said warmly. "May I assist you?" Abigail hesitated before carefully removing the wrapped handkerchief from her satchel. "I found something in the northern forest several nights ago," she explained. "I believe it belongs to someone from the royal household." Elias unfolded the linen slowly. The moment the silver medallion caught the light, his expression changed almost imperceptibly. Every captain of the royal guard recognized the personal crest worn only by the Alpha King when traveling beyond the palace without ceremony. Elias carefully closed the cloth once again before meeting Abigail's curious eyes. "Thank you for protecting this so carefully," he said sincerely. Would you be willing to wait a little while? Its owner should personally receive your kindness. Abigail nodded politely, assuming the medallion must belong to an important royal officer. She accepted a seat near the palace gardens while the Harvest Council continued inside the Great Hall. Gentle fountains sparkled beneath the clear autumn sky as white roses bloomed beside winding stone paths. The peaceful surroundings reminded her unexpectedly of the quiet forest clearing where another companion had once waited every evening beneath an ancient cedar. She wondered briefly whether the white wolf had fully recovered. She hoped it had found a safe place to continue its journey. Inside the royal council chamber, Elias quietly approached the throne where Rowan Blackwood had resumed his place as Alpha King for the first time in many days. Dressed in a dark ceremonial jacket embroidered with silver wolves, Rowan listened attentively as village leaders presented harvest reports and winter preparations. Yet the moment Elias placed the familiar wrapped handkerchief upon the polished arm of the throne, Rowan immediately understood. He carefully unwrapped the silver medallion, his fingertips resting briefly upon the broken leather cord. A quiet smile touched his face. "She brought it here herself," he said almost to himself. Elias nodded. "She believes it belongs to someone serving the palace." Rowan looked toward the tall windows overlooking the palace gardens where sunlight danced across white roses moving gently beneath the breeze. Somewhere beyond those gardens sat the gentle Omega who had never asked his name, never questioned his presence, and never treated him as anything more important than a wounded soul deserving compassion. Rising slowly from the throne, Rowan handed the remaining council matters to his senior advisors before walking toward the garden doors. Every measured step carried him closer to the one meeting he had imagined through countless silent nights beneath the moon. Outside, Abigail quietly admired the palace gardens, completely unaware that the familiar blue eyes she had come to know beneath white fur were already watching her once again, this time from the heart of the kingdom instead of the shelter of the forest. Recognition does not always begin with a face. Sometimes it begins with a feeling the heart remembers before the mind can explain it. Abigail stood quietly beside a marble fountain where clear water danced beneath the afternoon sunlight, watching colorful autumn leaves drift across the palace gardens. The peaceful beauty surrounding her should have eased the strange nervousness she felt, yet something inside her quietly insisted that this visit to Ashen Crown Palace was about to change her life in ways she could not understand. Soft footsteps echoed along the stone pathway behind her. She turned politely, expecting another palace servant or royal official. Instead, a tall man dressed in a dark ceremonial coat embroidered with silver wolves approached with calm, measured grace. His broad shoulders carried the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to responsibility, yet there was nothing intimidating in his expression. His blue eyes, clear as a mountain lake beneath winter sunlight, rested gently upon her face. The moment Abigail looked into them, an unexpected feeling stopped her thoughts. Those eyes seemed impossibly familiar. She had never met the Alpha King before, yet something deep inside her heart whispered that she had seen those eyes many times beneath another moon. Rowan stopped a respectful distance away before offering a warm smile that carried none of the formality expected from a king. "Miss Carter," he said softly, "thank you for returning something very precious to me." Abigail quickly lowered her head in respectful greeting. "Your Majesty." She carefully removed the wrapped silver medallion from her satchel and offered it with both hands. "I found this near an old cedar in the northern forest. I hoped it would find its rightful owner." Rowan accepted the medallion with quiet gratitude, his fingertips briefly brushing the familiar leather cord before his gaze returned to Abigail. "It already has." For a few peaceful moments neither spoke. The fountain murmured gently beside them while a cool breeze carried the fragrance of white roses through the garden. Rowan studied the young woman standing before him with the same quiet admiration that had slowly grown stronger beneath countless moonlit evenings. She looked exactly as she always had in the forest. Honest eyes. Gentle smile. Simple clothing untouched by pride or ambition. The only difference was that today she looked at him without recognizing the secret she had unknowingly protected for so many nights. Rowan slowly reached toward the medallion before holding it where the sunlight reflected across its polished silver surface. Do you remember the story Mrs. Martha told you about the Alpha King who sometimes traveled as a white wolf? Abigail smiled with quiet embarrassment. I remember thinking it was only an old legend. Rowan nodded gently. So did many people. His voice grew softer. Until now. Before Abigail could ask what he meant, Rowan carefully loosened the collar of his ceremonial coat just enough to reveal a narrow silver scar resting near his left shoulder. Abigail's eyes widened instantly. She knew that mark. Night after night she had gently cleaned the wound hidden beneath thick white fur before wrapping fresh herbs around the injured leg and shoulder of the lonely wolf waiting beneath the ancient cedar. Her breathing caught. Her thoughts struggled to connect what her eyes now saw with what her heart had already begun recognizing. Rowan met her stunned gaze with complete honesty. The white wolf you fed every night was never abandoned. He paused only long enough for the truth to settle gently between them. It was me. Silence surrounded the garden. Even the breeze seemed to pause among the white roses. Abigail searched his face again, and suddenly everything she had never understood began quietly falling into place. The extraordinary blue eyes. The thoughtful silence. The respectful nod after her awkward joke about bowing before the Alpha King. The mysterious bandage that had appeared overnight. The royal medallion beneath the cedar. Every memory returned at once, each one fitting perfectly beside the next until no doubt remained. She slowly covered her mouth with trembling fingers, not from fear, but from overwhelming amazement. Rowan smiled gently, his expression carrying quiet gratitude rather than royal pride. You never asked who I was, he said softly. You only saw someone who needed kindness. In all the years I have worn this crown, no one has ever given me a greater gift than that. The greatest honor is not given because someone seeks it. It is offered because their character leaves no other choice. Abigail remained speechless as the truth settled gently into her heart. Every quiet evening beneath the ancient cedar suddenly returned with remarkable clarity. The white wolf who had patiently listened to her stories, accepted her simple meals, rested upon the blanket she had carried from home, and silently walked beside her through the moonlit forest had never been an ordinary creature. He had been the Alpha King himself. She lowered her eyes for a moment, replaying every conversation she had shared without knowing who had been listening. Then, to Rowan's quiet surprise, a soft laugh escaped her lips. It was warm, genuine, and filled more with relief than embarrassment. Rowan smiled gently. May I ask what made you laugh? Abigail looked back at him, her cheeks lightly flushed. I keep remembering the night I joked that I should bow before the Alpha King if Mrs. Martha's story was true. Rowan's smile broadened. I remember. Abigail shook her head with quiet disbelief. And you actually lowered your head? Rowan gave the smallest nod. It seemed only fair. For a moment they simply smiled at one another while the peaceful garden seemed to hold the memory between them like another quiet secret. Before either could speak again, the great bronze bells of Ashen Crown Palace echoed across the courtyard, signaling the closing ceremony of the Harvest Council. Palace attendants respectfully invited every village representative into the Grand Assembly Hall where the Alpha King traditionally offered words of gratitude before the autumn gathering concluded. Abigail quietly stepped back, assuming their unexpected conversation had ended. Thank you for explaining everything, Your Majesty, she said sincerely. I am only glad you recovered safely. She turned politely, intending to join the other visitors. Rowan's calm voice gently stopped her. Miss Carter. Abigail looked back. Rowan's expression remained composed, yet something deeper rested within his eyes. Would you stand beside me during the closing ceremony? She blinked in surprise. Beside you? Rowan nodded. Yes. Before Abigail could respond, Elias Mercer approached with respectful confidence. Everything has been prepared, Your Majesty. Minutes later, the enormous assembly hall filled with representatives from villages throughout the kingdom. Sunlight streamed through towering stained-glass windows, illuminating polished marble floors beneath magnificent banners bearing the silver wolf crest of Ashen Crown. Hundreds of guests stood quietly as Rowan entered the hall. A gentle murmur of surprise spread through the crowd when Abigail walked several respectful steps behind him. Many assumed she must be an honored scholar or distinguished healer from a neighboring province. None recognized the quiet Omega from Willow Creek. Rowan stood before the assembled gathering, allowing the hall to settle into complete silence before speaking. Every autumn we celebrate successful harvests, strong villages, and faithful service throughout our kingdom. His steady voice carried effortlessly across the chamber. Today I wish to recognize a different kind of service. Curious whispers drifted softly among the audience. Rowan continued. Several weeks ago, while traveling beyond the palace, I found myself injured and unable to return immediately. He did not reveal how or why. He simply continued with calm honesty. During that time, one person offered me food, warmth, patience, and kindness every single evening. Abigail lowered her eyes, suddenly realizing where his words were leading. Rowan turned toward her with quiet gratitude before facing the hall once more. She did not know who I was. She expected nothing in return. She helped because compassion was already part of her heart long before she ever learned my name. Complete silence filled the vast chamber. Rowan stepped down from the royal platform until he stood directly before Abigail. Every noble, advisor, merchant, and village elder watched in astonishment as the Alpha King bowed his head respectfully before the gentle Omega from Willow Creek. His voice remained calm, yet every word carried unmistakable sincerity. A crown may command loyalty, he said softly, but only kindness earns trust. The greatest lesson I have learned this season came not from a throne, but from the quiet heart of the woman standing before me. Abigail's eyes filled gently with tears as the entire assembly rose together, not because anyone had ordered them to, but because respect had quietly become the only response worthy of the moment. The truest measure of a kingdom is not the strength of its crown, but the kindness it chooses to honor. The silence inside the grand assembly hall lingered long after Rowan lifted his head from his respectful bow. No one moved. No one questioned what they had witnessed. Noble families who had spent years believing greatness belonged only to powerful bloodlines now watched the Alpha King publicly honor a quiet Omega whose only remarkable act had been choosing compassion without knowing who stood before her. Abigail's eyes glistened as she struggled to find words worthy of the moment. She had never imagined standing in the royal palace, much less becoming the center of attention before the entire kingdom. Yet even now, with hundreds of eyes resting upon her, she remained exactly the same gentle woman who had carried fresh bread through the moonlit forest each evening simply because she could not bear the thought of a wounded creature facing the cold alone. Rowan offered his hand, not as a command from a king, but as an invitation from a man whose life had been quietly changed by another person's kindness. Abigail looked at his outstretched hand for a brief moment before placing hers gently within it. Warm applause slowly filled the great hall, growing stronger until it echoed beneath the vaulted ceiling like the first rain after a long season of drought. Mrs. Martha Green wiped away joyful tears while smiling proudly from among the village representatives. Elias Mercer stood nearby with quiet satisfaction, knowing he had witnessed a moment that future generations would one day remember not as a political decision, but as the day humility reshaped the heart of a king. In the weeks that followed, life throughout Ashen Crown changed in ways few had expected. Rowan established a new royal tradition known as the Night of Quiet Hearts, inviting villagers from every corner of the kingdom to share stories of ordinary people whose unseen kindness had changed lives without seeking recognition. Instead of honoring only warriors, nobles, and wealthy patrons, the palace began celebrating teachers, healers, gardeners, bakers, shepherds, and neighbors who quietly cared for others when no one was watching. Abigail never asked for a title or special privilege. She chose to remain the same compassionate Omega the village had always known, continuing to gather herbs, help elderly neighbors, and visit the children who waited eagerly for her stories each weekend. Yet whenever she traveled to the palace, she was welcomed not because the Alpha King had favored her, but because every person there genuinely respected the example she had quietly set for the entire kingdom. Rowan often escaped the formal halls of the palace whenever his responsibilities allowed, meeting Abigail beside the ancient cedar where their extraordinary friendship had first begun. Sometimes they simply walked together through the forest without speaking, listening to the stream flowing gently over smooth stones while moonlight shimmered through towering pines. On certain peaceful evenings, Rowan would once again become the magnificent white wolf Abigail had first discovered beneath the old cedar. She always smiled before placing a small basket of fresh bread beside him, laughing softly whenever he accepted it with the same calm dignity as before. "You know," she teased one evening, "being the Alpha King has never stopped you from enjoying homemade bread." Rowan's bright blue eyes reflected quiet amusement before he gently lowered his great white head exactly as he had. The night she joked about bowing before a king hidden beneath white fur. They both laughed together beneath the moonlight, no longer separated by secrets or uncertainty, but united by trust that had grown naturally through countless simple acts of kindness. Years later, travelers passing through the northern forest sometimes paused beside the ancient cedar where wildflowers bloomed more brightly than anywhere else in the kingdom. The villagers would smile whenever curious visitors asked why the place felt so peaceful. They would simply answer that long ago, an ordinary Omega taught an Alpha King the greatest lesson he would ever learn. Power may inspire obedience, wealth may attract admiration, and crowns may command respect, but only a heart willing to offer kindness without asking who deserves it possesses the quiet strength capable of changing both a king and an entire kingdom forever.